In the summer of 2001, a team of marine engineers was doing something completely routine off the coast of Cuba. They were mapping the ocean floor with advanced sonar equipment, looking for shipwrecks. Standard work. Nothing unusual expected. But what they found that day would challenge everything we think we know about human history. At a depth of nearly 2,000 feet, in waters so deep that sunlight has never touched the bottom, their sonar detected something that should not exist. Geometric structures, massive stone formations arranged in precise patterns, pyramids, plazas, what appeared to be roads connecting them. The lead researcher, a woman named Paulina Zelitsky, watched the sonar images come through in real time. She had spent decades at sea. She knew the difference between natural rock formations and something else. And this was something else. The structures covered an area of roughly 2 square kilometers. The symmetry was undeniable. Perfect right angles, smooth surfaces, organized layout. The kind of precision that requires planning, mathematics, engineering. The kind of precision that requires civilization. Zelitsky brought in additional experts, geologists, archaeologists, more advanced scanning equipment. Every new scan revealed more detail. They found what looked like inscriptions, symbols carved into stone. They documented pyramid structures with bases measuring over 300 feet across. But here is where the story gets strange. The Cuban government initially showed interest. They sent officials. They reviewed the data. National Geographic was preparing to fund a full expedition. Documentary crews were lining up. This was potentially the archaeological discovery of the century. And then silence. Funding disappeared. Access to the site became restricted. Zelitsky's research team was quietly disbanded. The story vanished from mainstream media almost overnight. When pressed for answers, officials gave vague responses about needing more study, more time, more analysis. That was over 20 years ago. To this day, no major expedition has been allowed to return to those structures. No follow-up research has been published. The Cuban government will not discuss it. The coordinates remain off-limits, which raises an obvious question. If these structures are just natural formations, just rocks shaped by current and time, why the secrecy? Why shut down the research? Why block access? Unless they found something down there that someone does not want us to know about. Now, before we go any further, let me be clear about something. We are not here to make wild claims without evidence. We are not here to invent fantasies. What we are going to do over the next 2 hours is look at the actual evidence, the documented history, the scientific data, and the uncomfortable questions that nobody in the mainstream wants to touch. Because those structures off the Cuban coast, they are not alone. Similar underwater formations have been found off the Bahamas, near Japan, along the coast of India. Ancient texts from cultures around the world describe advanced civilizations that were swallowed by the sea. And the most famous of these stories comes from a Greek philosopher named Plato, writing in 360 BC. He called it Atlantis. For over 2,000 years, people have debated whether Plato was describing a real place or just telling a philosophical story. But what if he was doing both? What if the reason his description feels so specific, so detailed, so technical, is because he was working from actual historical records? And what if those structures sitting on the ocean floor right now, forbidden from investigation, are proof that he was right? Hey, this is Mr. H, and if you are someone who questions the official story, who wants to dig deeper into the mysteries they do not teach in school, then you are in the right place. We are building a community of people who refuse to accept easy answers when the evidence points somewhere else. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, because what we are about to explore together is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about human history. Now, let us get back to those underwater pyramids and talk about what they might actually be, because the evidence suggests they are not just ruins of some forgotten city. They might be something far stranger. They might be the remains of a ritual complex, a place where ancient people gathered to perform ceremonies that mainstream archaeology refuses to acknowledge. Ceremonies designed to make contact with something living in the deep ocean. Most people think Atlantis is just a myth, a story philosophers made up to teach lessons about hubris and the fall of civilizations. And honestly, That is exactly what we have been told to think. But when you actually read what Plato wrote, when you look at the level of detail he provides, something does not add up. Plato was not writing fantasy fiction. He was one of the most rigorous thinkers in human history. A man who dedicated his life to separating truth from opinion, reality from illusion. So why would he suddenly abandon that discipline to invent an elaborate fairy tale? He would not, and he tells us directly that he is not. In two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC, Plato lays out the story of Atlantis. But he does not present it as allegory. He frames it as history. He gives us a clear chain of custody for the information. According to Plato, the story came from his ancestor Solon, who was one of the wisest men in Athens. Around 590 BC, Solon traveled to Egypt, to the city of Sais. There, he met with priests, who had access to records far older than anything in Greece. These priests told Solon about a powerful civilization that existed 9,000 years before his time. Let me repeat that. 9,000 years before Solon. That would place Atlantis around 9600 BC. We are talking about a civilization thriving at the end of the last ice age, when mainstream archaeology insists humans were still living in small hunter-gatherer tribes. The Egyptian priests told Solon that this civilization, which they called Atlantis, was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That is what the ancient Greeks called the Strait of Gibraltar. Beyond that strait lies the Atlantic Ocean, and here is where it gets specific. Plato describes Atlantis as an island larger than Libya and Asia combined. He describes its geography in detail, a central island with a mountain at its heart. Around that mountain, the Atlanteans built a city in concentric rings. 3 rings of water, 2 rings of land, massive stone walls, bridges connecting each section, canals linking the rings to the sea. This is not vague mythology. This is urban planning. This is engineering. Plato provides measurements. He describes the building materials. He tells us they used 3 types of stone, 1 white, 1 black, 1 red, which they quarried from the island itself. He mentions a mysterious metal called orichalcum that glowed with a reddish light. He describes their government structure, their military organization, their agricultural systems, their laws. This is the kind of detail you get from historical records, not from someone making things up. But mainstream archaeology has a problem with Plato's timeline. 9,000 years before Solon means we are talking about a Bronze Age level civilization existing thousands of years before the Bronze Age officially began. That does not fit the accepted narrative of human development. So the easy solution is to call it fiction and move on. Except the evidence keeps refusing to cooperate with that dismissal. In 1998, a researcher named Robert Sarmast started looking at bathymetric maps of the Mediterranean seafloor. He was specifically searching for underwater features that matched Plato's description, and he found something. A massive plateau between Cyprus and Syria, now submerged, with geometric formations that suggest artificial construction. But an even more compelling candidate sits in the middle of the Sahara Desert. It is called the Richat structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara. It is a massive circular formation in Mauritania, roughly 23 miles in diameter. And when you look at it from above, you see concentric rings, multiple circles, one inside another, exactly like Plato described. For years, geologists assumed it was an eroded volcanic dome, but recent studies show no volcanic activity. The rocks are sedimentary. The formation appears to have been shaped by water erosion, which means at some point this area was submerged, or at least surrounded by water. The Richat structure sits at the exact latitude Plato suggested. It has the right size, the right shape, the right geological composition. White limestone, black basalt, red sandstone, the 3 types of stone Plato mentioned. There is even evidence of ancient waterways and channels that match his description of canals. Could this be Atlantis? Could Plato's island in the Atlantic have actually been a coastal civilization in North Africa before the Sahara became a desert? Before sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age? Because here is what we know for certain. Between 15,000 and 11,000 years ago, the Earth underwent dramatic climate change. The Ice Age ended. Glaciers melted. Sea levels rose by over 400 feet. Coastlines that had been inhabited for thousands of years disappeared under the ocean. Entire landscapes were submerged. Geologists call one event Meltwater Pulse 1A. It happened around 14,600 years ago. In less than 500 years, sea levels jumped by 50 feet. Any civilization living on the coast would have been devastated. Any coastal cities would now be underwater. We know this happened. We have the geological evidence. What we do not have is acknowledgement that any advanced civilization existed back then to be affected by it. But indigenous cultures around the world have oral histories describing exactly this kind of catastrophe. Australian Aboriginal stories speak of a time when you could walk to islands that are now separated by ocean. Indian texts describe the city of Dwarka being swallowed by the sea. Japanese legends talk about a lost land called Mu. Native American tribes have flood stories that describe survivors fleeing rising waters. Over 200 cultures worldwide have flood mythology. The stories are too similar, too widespread, to be coincidence. They describe the same event from different perspectives, and they all describe a time when the old world drowned, and the survivors had to start over. What if Plato was not inventing Atlantis? What if he was preserving one of the last written records of the pre-flood civilization? What if the Egyptian priests were telling Solon the truth, and mainstream archaeology simply refuses to accept it because it demolishes their timeline of human development? Because if a civilization as advanced as Plato describes existed 11,000 years ago, then everything we think we know about the rise of humanity is wrong. It means civilization is far older than we have been taught. It means knowledge was lost. It means our ancestors were doing things we cannot explain with the primitive tools we assume they had. And it means those structures sitting on the ocean floor off the coast of Cuba, those underwater pyramids that somebody does not want investigated, might be exactly what they look like. The ruins of something ancient, something powerful, something that knew secrets about this planet that we are only beginning to rediscover. Before we go any deeper into this, I am curious. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are? Are you listening to this during your morning coffee, your lunch break? Or maybe it is 3 in the morning and you are down the rabbit hole like I am. Drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you are in. I want to see how far this conversation is reaching, because what we are about to explore next affects every coastline, every ocean, every culture that has a flood story, which means it affects all of us. So let us talk about what the Atlanteans were actually doing, because according to Plato, they were not just building cities and farming land, they were obsessed with something specific, something centered around water and ritual and communication with forces they believed controlled their fate. At the heart of their capital city stood a temple dedicated to Poseidon. Not just any temple. Plato describes it as one of the most magnificent structures ever built. 600 feet long, 300 feet wide, with a height that made it visible from anywhere in the city. The exterior was covered in silver. The roof was plated with gold. Inside, the walls were lined with orichalcum, that mysterious reddish metal that supposedly glowed with its own light. At the center of this temple stood a massive golden statue of Poseidon, riding a chariot pulled by winged horses. Around him, 100 nereids, sea nymphs, riding dolphins. This was not decoration. This was a statement. The Atlanteans believed their entire civilization existed because of their relationship with the ocean and whatever lived in it. But the temple was just the centerpiece. The real mystery is in the layout of the city itself. Those concentric rings Plato describes, alternating between water and land, that design serves a purpose beyond defense or transportation. When you map it out, when you look at the geometry, you are looking at something that resembles an amplifier. Think about it. Circular channels of water surrounding a central point. Stone walls between them, creating barriers and reflective surfaces. If you were trying to create acoustic resonance, if you were trying to amplify sound waves or direct them toward a specific target, this is exactly the kind of structure you would build. We know ancient cultures understood acoustics far better than we give them credit for. The oracle chamber at Delphi sits on top of a geological fault that releases ethylene gas, which causes hallucinations, but the chamber itself is designed to amplify the voice of the priestess into something that sounds otherworldly. The pyramid at Chichen Itza produces an echo that sounds like a quetzal bird when you clap at the base of the stairs. Newgrange in Ireland is aligned so that on the winter solstice, sunlight illuminates the inner chamber, and the walls are carved with spirals that some researchers believe represent sound waves. These were not accidents. Ancient builders knew how to manipulate sound, light, and natural forces in ways that modern architects are only beginning to understand. So what were the Atlanteans amplifying? What were they trying to project or receive? Plato tells us about their rituals. Every 5 or 6 years, the 10 kings of Atlantis would gather in the temple of Poseidon to renew their oaths and pass judgment on anyone who broke their laws. They would hunt bulls that roamed freely in the temple grounds. Not with weapons, with nets and clubs only. Once they captured a bull, they would lead it to a pillar in the center of the temple where their laws were inscribed. Then they would sacrifice the bull over the pillar, letting its blood flow down and mix with water in a bowl. They would draw the blood into cups and pour it over the fire while swearing oaths to uphold their covenant with Poseidon. Now, mainstream scholars read this and see primitive religious ritual, blood sacrifice to appease a god, standard ancient behavior. But look closer at what is actually happening. They are mixing blood with seawater. Blood contains iron, salt, proteins, electrolytes. Seawater contains sodium, magnesium, calcium, chloride. When you combine them, you create a conductive solution. You create something that can carry electrical current. Modern experiments have shown that seawater is an excellent conductor of electricity. Add organic compounds, add minerals, and you increase that conductivity. The ancient Egyptians knew this. The Baghdad battery, found in Iraq and dated to around 200 BC, is a clay jar with a copper cylinder and an iron rod that, when filled with an acidic liquid, produces electrical current. Some researchers believe similar devices existed far earlier. What if the Atlantean rituals were not about appeasing a god? What if they were about generating energy? What if that temple, with its metal-lined walls and its geometric precision, was designed to create and direct electromagnetic fields? And if so, why? What were they powering? Or more disturbingly, what were they trying to signal? Because there is another detail in Plato's account that nobody talks about. He mentions that the Atlanteans had a columned hall near the temple where they would gather after the rituals. He describes the acoustics of this hall as extraordinary. Voices would carry in strange ways. Sounds would echo and reverberate until they seemed to take on a life of their own. Researchers have studied similar ancient structures. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta is an underground temple carved from solid limestone around 3000 BC. When you speak or chant at a specific frequency, around 110 Hz, the entire chamber vibrates. People report feeling the vibration in their bones, in their chest cavity, in their skull. Some describe altered states of consciousness, visions, a sense of connection to something beyond normal perception. The Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, the Great Gallery and the Pyramid at Giza, the stone circles at Stonehenge, all of these structures exhibit unusual acoustic properties. They amplify certain frequencies. They create standing waves. They turn sound into something physical, something that affects the human body and mind. The Atlanteans built their entire city as a series of concentric circles with water channels between them. Water is an excellent medium for transmitting sound waves, far better than air. Low-frequency sounds travel through water for hundreds of miles. Whales and dolphins use this principle to communicate across vast distances of ocean. What if the Atlantean temple complex was designed to generate low-frequency sounds, to send them out through those circular water channels, to project them into the deep ocean? And what if they were listening for a response? This sounds insane until you remember that we only discovered in the late 20th century that the ocean is full of sounds we cannot explain. In 1997, NOAA hydrophones picked up an extremely powerful low-frequency sound in the South Pacific. They called it the bloop. It was louder than any known animal, louder than blue whale calls, and it came from a region of the ocean over 2 miles deep. The sound profile suggested a living creature, something massive, but nothing we have in our biological databases matches it. There are dozens of these unexplained ocean sounds. The Julia, The slowdown, the train, the upsweep, all of them detected at depths where sunlight never reaches, where the pressure would crush any known organism, and yet something down there is making noise. The deep ocean remains almost entirely unexplored. We have better maps of Mars than we do of our own ocean floor. Less than 20% of the ocean has been mapped in detail. The technology to explore the deepest regions has only existed for a few decades. Before that, before sonar and submersibles and remote-operated vehicles, the deep ocean was as unknown to humanity as outer space. But ancient cultures were obsessed with it. Almost every mythology includes stories of gods or monsters living in the depths. The Babylonians had Tiamat, the primordial sea dragon. The Greeks had the Titans imprisoned in Tartarus, which some texts locate beneath the ocean. Hindu mythology describes the Asuras living in Patala, the underworld beneath the cosmic ocean. The Sumerians called it the Abzu, the deep freshwater ocean beneath the earth where Enki, the god of wisdom, had his palace. These are not random stories. These are consistent themes across cultures that never had contact with each other. They all describe something ancient, something powerful, something intelligent living in places humans could not reach. The Atlanteans built their civilization around water. They structured their capital as an acoustic device. They performed rituals designed to create conductive solutions and generate energy. They had a temple dedicated to the god of the ocean positioned at the exact center of their amplification system. What were they trying to reach? What did they think was down there listening? And more importantly, did they ever get an answer? Because if Atlantis was destroyed, if their civilization was wiped out in a single day and night, as Plato claims, maybe it was not just a natural disaster. Maybe it was not just earthquakes and floods. Maybe they contacted something they should have left alone. Maybe they performed a ritual that worked too well. And maybe what happened to them is a warning that we are only now beginning to understand. Here is what makes the Atlantis story genuinely disturbing. It is not alone. Not even close. When you start looking at flood legends from around the world, you find the same story told over and over with different names and different details. But the core narrative remains identical. A great civilization existed before us. They grew powerful. They built cities. Then the waters came and destroyed everything. Only a handful of people survived to tell the story. Anthropologists have documented over 200 distinct flood myths from cultures on every inhabited continent. These are not vague stories about rain. These are detailed accounts of catastrophic sea level rise, of land disappearing beneath the waves, of entire populations fleeing to higher ground. The Epic of Gilgamesh from ancient Mesopotamia describes Utnapishtim, who was warned by the gods that a flood would destroy humanity. He built a massive boat, saved his family and animals, and after the waters receded, the gods granted him immortality for preserving life. Sound familiar? But this story was written down around 2100 BC, over 1,000 years before the biblical flood narrative. In Hindu tradition, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu, who was warned by a fish avatar of the god Vishnu that a flood would destroy the world. Manu built a boat, survived the deluge, and became the progenitor of humanity after the waters subsided. The text describes the flood as punishment for human corruption, but also as a necessary reset of cosmic cycles. The Hopi people of North America speak of multiple worlds that came before ours. The first world was destroyed by fire, the second world was destroyed by ice, the third world was destroyed by flood. They describe survivors climbing through a hollow reed to escape the rising waters, emerging into the fourth world where we live now. Australian Aboriginal cultures have some of the oldest continuous oral traditions on Earth. DNA studies and archaeological evidence confirm their presence in Australia for over 65,000 years, and their flood stories are incredibly specific. They describe times when the coastline extended much further out, when you could walk to islands that are now separated by ocean. They name specific geographic features that are now underwater. In 2015, researchers compared Aboriginal flood stories with geological data on sea level rise around Australia. The stories matched perfectly. Areas described as once connected land are now separated by water that rose between 7,000 and 13,000 years ago. These oral histories have preserved accurate geographic information for over 10,000 years. Let that sink in. Cultures with no written language maintained precise details about coastlines that disappeared before the pyramids were built, before Sumerians invented cuneiform, before any civilization we officially recognize existed. So when did this flood happen? When did sea levels rise enough to drown coastal cities? The answer is clear in the geological record. At the peak of the last ice age, around 20,000 years ago, sea levels were roughly 400 feet lower than today. Massive ice sheets covered North America, Europe, and Asia. All that water was locked up in glaciers. The coastlines extended far beyond where they are now. What is now underwater continental shelf was dry, habitable land. Then the ice melted. Not gradually, not smoothly, in pulses. Sudden, catastrophic events where massive amounts of water entered the oceans in very short periods of time. The most dramatic was Meltwater Pulse 1A, dated to approximately 14,600 years ago. In less than 500 years, possibly as little as 100 years, sea levels rose between 50 and 80 feet. Entire regions were submerged. Any coastal civilization would have been devastated. This was not a localized flood. This was global. And it perfectly matches the timeline that Plato gives for the destruction of Atlantis. But mainstream archaeology has a standard response to all of this. They say yes, the flood happened, but there were no advanced civilizations back then to be affected by it. Humans 14,000 years ago were primitive hunter-gatherers. They had stone tools and animal skins. They lived in small nomadic groups. The idea of cities and temples and organized religion would not develop for another 8,000 years, except we keep finding evidence that contradicts that timeline. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey was discovered in 1994. It is a massive stone temple complex, with carved pillars weighing up to 20 tons each, arranged in circles, decorated with detailed reliefs of animals. The dating is undeniable. It was built around 9600 BC, that is 11,600 years ago. Thousands of years before agriculture, before pottery, before any civilization we thought existed. And it gets stranger. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried around 80,000 BC. Someone took the time and effort to fill in the entire complex with debris, preserving it perfectly. Why? Who buries a temple that took decades or centuries to build? Unless they were trying to hide it. Unless they knew something was coming. In 2001, marine archaeologists discovered the underwater ruins of Dwarka off the coast of Gujarat, India. Stone structures, walls, a grid pattern suggesting urban planning. Ancient Hindu texts describe Dwarka as the capital city of Lord Krishna, a prosperous port that was submerged by the ocean after Krishna's death. The archaeological evidence matches the textual descriptions. Carbon dating of artifacts recovered from the site suggests occupation around 15,000 BC. Off the coast of Japan lies the Yonaguni Monument, discovered in 1986. Massive stone terraces, steps, walls, and what appear to be carved symbols. Marine geologist Masaaki Kimura has spent decades studying the site. He argues the structures show clear evidence of human modification. Skeptics claim it is natural erosion. But natural erosion does not create right angles, parallel edges, and symmetrical steps. The structure would have been above water during the last ice age. If it is artificial, it dates to at least 10,000 BC, possibly much earlier. There is Bimini Road in the Bahamas, discovered in 1968. A half-mile-long formation of rectangular limestone blocks arranged in a linear pattern. The American psychic Edgar Cayce predicted in 1940 that Atlantis ruins would be found near Bimini in 1968 or 69. Whether coincidence or not, the formation is there. Geologists argue about whether it is natural beach rock or quarried stone, but the precision of the arrangement raises questions. In the Black Sea, Robert Ballard, the same explorer who found the Titanic, discovered evidence of ancient shorelines now submerged under hundreds of feet of water. He found what appeared to be ancient structures, including a rectangular building with carved wooden beams preserved in the oxygen-free depths. Radiocarbon dating showed the wood was cut around 5500 BC. The Black Sea flood is now accepted science. Around 5800 BC, the Mediterranean Sea breached a natural dam and flooded the Black Sea basin. The The water level rose hundreds of feet. Anyone living on the shores would have watched the sea advance mile after mile, day after day, unstoppable. This event almost certainly inspired regional flood myths, including possibly the Noah story. But that was a localized event. The global sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age was far more catastrophic and happened much earlier. If civilizations existed on the coasts during the Ice Age, their remains are now underwater, buried under sediment, inaccessible, forgotten. Which brings us back to those structures off the coast of Cuba. Pyramids at 2,000 feet depth. Too deep for recreational divers. Too deep for most research equipment without serious funding. And conveniently closed to investigation. The pattern is clear. Cultures worldwide remember a time before the flood. They remember advanced ancestors. They remember cities swallowed by the sea. And we keep finding physical evidence that matches their stories. The official narrative says these are coincidences, natural formations, exaggerated myths. But when you have 200 cultures telling the same story, when you have geological proof of catastrophic flooding at the exact time period they describe, when you keep finding underwater structures that should not exist, at some point you have to ask a different question, not whether the flood happened. We know it did. But who drowned in it? What knowledge was lost? And why are we so determined to pretend they never existed? Let us get into the details of what these people were actually doing inside those temples. Because when you strip away the mythology and look at the mechanics of ancient rituals, you start to see patterns that look less like religion and more like applied science. Plato gives us a step-by-step account of the Atlantean ceremony. 10 kings gather. They hunt a bull using only nets and clubs. They bring the animal to a central pillar. They cut its throat over the inscription of their laws. The blood flows down into a bowl mixed with water. They draw the mixture into golden cups. They pour it over fire while making oaths. Then they drink what remains. On the surface, this looks like standard blood sacrifice. Ancient people killed animals to please their gods. We have seen it in dozens of cultures. The Hebrews sacrificed lambs. The Romans sacrificed bulls. The Mayans sacrificed humans. Nothing unusual here, except the Atlantean ritual has specific elements that do not quite fit the normal pattern of appeasement sacrifice. First, why bulls specifically? Why not sheep or goats or any other domesticated animal? Bulls appear in ritual contexts across the ancient Mediterranean with unusual frequency. The Minoans on Crete, who many researchers believe were culturally connected to Atlantis, were obsessed with bulls. Their palaces are decorated with bull imagery. They practiced bull leaping, where acrobats would vault over charging bulls in what appears to be a religious ceremony. The ancient Persians practiced Mithraism, which centered on the ritual slaughter of a bull. The cult spread throughout the Roman Empire, particularly among soldiers. Their temples, called Mithraea, were always built underground or in caves, and the central image was always Mithras killing a bull while a serpent, dog, and scorpion drink its blood. In Celtic tradition, the most powerful divination ritual was the tarbfeis, where a bull was sacrificed, and a priest would wrap himself in the hide and enter a trance state to receive prophetic visions. The bull was not just food or an offering, it was a conduit. What makes bulls special? From a biological standpoint, bulls are massive reservoirs of bioelectric energy. A full-grown bull weighs over 2,000 pounds, most of it muscle tissue. Muscle tissue conducts electricity. The heart of a bull is enormous, generating powerful electromagnetic fields with every beat. The blood contains high concentrations of iron, which is a conductor and a magnetic element. When you slaughter a bull and let its blood flow fresh, you have gallons of warm conductive fluid rich in minerals and organic compounds. Now mix that with seawater, which is already a strong electrolyte solution. Add the salt, add the magnesium, add the other dissolved minerals. What you have created is a battery solution, a conductive medium capable of carrying electrical current. The ancient Egyptians knew about this principle. We find evidence in the Dendera temple complex, where hieroglyphs appear to show what look like light bulbs or electrical devices inside glass tubes. Mainstream Egyptology dismisses this as symbolic representation of the Djed pillar, or other religious imagery. But some researchers have built working models based on the hieroglyphs using copper tubes, zinc rods, and acidic solutions. The devices produce light. The Baghdad battery proves the principle. A clay jar, a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and an acidic liquid. Fill it with vinegar or citrus juice, and you get about 1.1 volts. Not much, but measurable. Now imagine scaling that up. Imagine using vessels the size of the golden bowls Plato describes. Imagine using blood and seawater instead of vinegar. Imagine connecting multiple vessels in series. You could generate significant electrical potential, but for what purpose? This is where the architecture becomes critical. Remember those concentric rings of water surrounding the temple? Remember the metal-lined walls? Remember the columned hall with the strange acoustic properties? In 1998, an acoustic engineer named Robert Temple studied ancient sites and found something remarkable. Many of them exhibit properties of what modern physics calls a Helmholtz resonator. This is a cavity with a narrow opening that resonates at specific frequencies. When you generate sound at the right pitch, the entire structure vibrates. The effect amplifies certain tones while dampening others. The Great Pyramid at Giza has chambers that resonate at approximately 110 Hz when certain tones are produced. The King's Chamber is built from red granite, which contains high concentrations of quartz crystal. Quartz is piezoelectric. When you apply pressure or vibration to quartz, it generates electrical charge. When you apply electrical charge to quartz, it vibrates. It is why quartz is used in watches, radios, and electronics. So you have a stone chamber made of piezoelectric material. You generate specific sound frequencies, maybe through chanting, maybe through instruments. The chamber resonates. The quartz generates electrical charge, and if you have a conductive solution present, if you have vessels of blood and seawater arranged in the right configuration, that electrical charge has a pathway. The Atlantean temple complex was not just a building, it was a machine. Christopher Dunn, a master craftsman and engineer, spent years studying the Great Pyramid. His conclusion, published in his book, The Giza Power Plant, is that the pyramid was designed to convert seismic energy into electricity using the piezoelectric properties of granite and the acoustic properties of the internal chambers. He argues that the so-called sarcophagus in the king's chamber was not a burial box, but a resonating chamber designed to vibrate at specific frequencies. Mainstream Egyptology rejects this theory completely, but Dunn's technical analysis is based on precision measurements and engineering principles. The tolerances in the pyramid's construction are impossibly tight. The blocks fit together with gaps smaller than a human hair. The chambers are aligned to mathematical constants. The materials are specifically chosen for their conductive and resonant properties. If the Egyptians, who mainstream history says built the pyramids around 2500 BC, were capable of this level of engineering, what were the Atlanteans capable of 11,000 years ago? And why would both civilizations invest enormous resources into building these structures if they were just tombs or temples? Unless they were doing something else. Unless they were generating power. Unless they were creating fields of energy for purposes we have lost. There is a man named Ed Leedskalnin who might give us a clue. In the early 1900s, he single-handedly built Coral Castle in Florida. He quarried and moved blocks of coral limestone weighing up to 30 tons each. He worked alone, mostly at night, and refused to let anyone watch him. When asked how he did it, he said he understood the secrets of the pyramids, that he knew how to manipulate magnetic fields and leverage natural forces. After his death, researchers found his workshop filled with homemade electrical devices, magnets, and what appeared to be experimental equipment for studying magnetic levitation. He never revealed his methods completely, but he demonstrated that one person with knowledge of electromagnetic principles could accomplish what would normally require industrial machinery. Tesla had similar ideas. Nikola Tesla believed that resonance and frequency could be used to manipulate matter, generate power wirelessly, and even trigger earthquakes. He built a small mechanical oscillator that he claimed caused a building to shake. He said if he had left it running, it would have brought the building down. He called resonance the universal principle. What if ancient civilizations understood this? What if their rituals were not about pleasing gods, but about tuning themselves and their environment to specific frequencies? What if the blood and seawater mixture was not symbolic but functional? What if the chanting and music were not worship but engineering? The ritual Plato describes has all the elements: a conductive solution created from organic and mineral sources, a metal-lined chamber designed to contain and direct electromagnetic fields, a resonant structure built to amplify sound and vibration, and a purpose that involved renewing their covenant with Poseidon, the god of the ocean, the god of earthquakes, the god of forces beyond human control. They were not praying to him. They were trying to communicate with him, or with something they believed lived in his domain. But here is the terrifying question. What if the ritual worked? What if they succeeded in creating a signal strong enough to reach the deep ocean? What if something down there received that signal and responded? Because the Phoenicians, who were almost certainly cultural descendants of Atlantean survivors, continued similar rituals for centuries. They built temples to Melkart, a god associated with the sea. They practiced bull sacrifice. And in their colony of Carthage, they built the Tophet, a sanctuary where they burned offerings, including animals and, according to Roman sources, children. Modern archaeology has excavated Tophet sites. The evidence is disturbing. Thousands of urns containing the charred remains of infants and young children mixed with animal bones. Inscriptions dedicating the offerings to Baal Hammon and Tanit, deities associated with the sky and sea. The Romans claimed the Carthaginians were barbarians who murdered their own children to appease their gods. But what if the Romans misunderstood? What if the Carthaginians believed they were maintaining an ancient covenant? What if they thought that without these rituals, without the energy and the signal, and the connection to whatever their ancestors had contacted, their civilization would fall? And it did fall. Rome destroyed Carthage completely in 146 BC, burned the city, killed or enslaved the population, salted the earth, erased the culture. We have almost no Phoenician texts surviving. Everything we know about them comes from their enemies. What knowledge was lost in that destruction? What rituals were interrupted? What connections were severed? The Atlanteans performed their ceremonies every 5 or 6 years. The timing is specific. That is roughly the cycle of solar maximums and minimums, the cycle of tidal forces when certain planetary alignments occur, the cycle that ancient astronomers tracked obsessively because they believed cosmic rhythms affected earthly events. They were not randomly killing bulls and mixing blood with water. They were following a schedule. They were maintaining a signal. They were keeping a channel open to something they believed they needed to stay connected to, and then they failed. Plato says Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and night. Earthquakes, floods, the island sinking into the sea, the entire civilization gone. Natural disaster or consequence? Did they miss a ritual? Did they perform it wrong? Or did they finally get an answer they were not prepared for? We need to talk about what actually exists in the deep ocean. Because the uncomfortable truth is that we have no idea. We have explored less than 5% of the ocean floor in any meaningful detail. The deepest parts remain as unknown to us as the surface of distant planets. And what little we have discovered suggests that the deep ocean is far stranger than we ever imagined. The Mariana Trench is the deepest point in Earth's oceans, nearly 7 miles down. The pressure at that depth is over 15,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a human body instantly, enough to collapse a submarine like an aluminum can. For most of history, scientists assumed nothing could survive down there. The conditions were simply too extreme. Then in 1960, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh descended to the bottom in a bathyscaphe called Trieste, and they saw life. Fish, shrimp-like creatures, things moving in the sediment. Life had found a way to exist in conditions that should be impossible. Since then, every deep ocean expedition has found more evidence that the abyss is teeming with creatures we never knew existed. Giant squid with eyes the size of dinner plates, jellyfish 40 feet across, six-gill sharks that have remained virtually unchanged for 200 million years, tube worms clustered around hydrothermal vents, living without sunlight, feeding on chemicals erupting from the Earth's crust. And these are just the species we have managed to document. Marine biologists estimate we have identified less than 10% of ocean species. The deep ocean could contain millions of undiscovered life forms, some of them massive, some of them intelligent, some of them completely outside our understanding of biology. In 1997, NOAA hydrophones detected a sound in the South Pacific that should not exist, the bloop. an ultra-low frequency sound far louder than any known biological source. The audio profile matched the pattern of a living creature, something with lungs or air sacs, something massive enough to produce sound waves detectable over 3,000 miles away. The official explanation eventually settled on iceberg carving, massive chunks of ice breaking off Antarctic glaciers and creating shock waves as they hit the water. It is plausible. It fits the location, but it does not quite fit the acoustic signature. The bloop has harmonics that suggest complexity, structure, not the random crack of breaking ice, but something more organized. And the bloop is not alone. NOAA has recorded dozens of unexplained ocean sounds. The Julia, detected in 1999, lasting 15 seconds, and loud enough to be heard across the Pacific Basin. The Slow Down, a sound that decreased in frequency over 7 minutes, unlike anything produced by known marine animals or geological processes. The Train, which sounds exactly like its name, a rhythmic pattern that repeats for hours. Then there is the 52 Hz whale. First detected in 1989, this creature produces calls at a frequency no other whale uses. Blue whales call at 15 to 20 Hz. Fin whales at 20 Hz. This one calls at 52 Hz, too high for other whales to hear or respond to. It has been tracked for decades, swimming the same migration routes, calling endlessly into the void, apparently alone. Scientists call it the loneliest whale in the world. But what if it is not alone? What if it is calling at a frequency meant for something else? Something that does not register on our equipment because we are not listening at the right depth or the right range? The ocean is full of sounds we barely understand. Clicks and whistles from dolphins and whales, yes, but also hums and pulses from unknown sources, low-frequency vibrations that seem to emanate from the seafloor itself. Patterns that repeat at regular intervals, like a broadcast. Which brings us to something most people do not know about. The Bimini Road, that limestone formation off the Bahamas, sits in an area where divers have reported unusual phenomena for decades. Compasses spinning, electronic equipment malfunctioning, a feeling of disorientation and unease. The same effects reported in the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle is usually dismissed as myth, exaggerated by sensational books and documentaries, but the U.S. Coast Guard has documented hundreds of disappearances in that region, ships and aircraft vanishing without distress calls, wreckage never found. The official explanations cite human error, sudden storms, methane gas eruptions from the seafloor that can sink ships and disrupt aircraft engines. All plausible, all reasonable, but they do not explain the electronic anomalies, the magnetic disturbances, the reports from pilots and sailors of instruments going haywire, of compasses pointing in wrong directions, of time distortions. Bruce Gernon, a pilot who flew through the triangle in 1970, describes entering a tunnel-shaped cloud that seemed to pull his plane forward. His instruments failed. When he emerged, he had traveled 90 miles in 3 minutes, far faster than his aircraft's maximum speed. He landed with significantly less fuel consumed than the distance should have required. Electronic fog, he called it. And he is not the only pilot to report this phenomenon. There are geological explanations. The Puerto Rico Trench, just south of the Bermuda Triangle, is nearly 5.5 miles deep. It is a subduction zone where the North American plate is being pulled under the Caribbean plate. The magnetic field in this region is measurably unstable. Compasses can give false readings. The seafloor is fractured and releases gases. But unstable magnetic fields and gas releases do not explain why this specific region has such a concentration of incidents. They do not explain the electronic fog. They do not explain the time distortions. Unless something down there is generating those fields, unless there is a source of electromagnetic interference powerful enough to affect aircraft and ships, unless the ancient structures we keep finding underwater are not just ruins but still active technology, which sounds absolutely insane until you look at what the US Navy knows and refuses to discuss. In 2019, the Navy confirmed that videos leaked by Navy pilots showing unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, were authentic. The objects in those videos move in ways that violate known physics. They accelerate from 0 to hypersonic speeds instantly. They make right-angle turns at velocities that would pulverize any known material. They have no visible propulsion systems. And here is the critical detail that does not get enough attention. Multiple Navy pilots have reported these objects entering and exiting the ocean, not crashing, not landing, transitioning seamlessly from air to water, as if the medium makes no difference to them. Commander David Fravor, who encountered a UAP off the coast of San Diego in 2004, describes the object hovering above a disturbance in the ocean, a churning patch of white water, as if something large was just below the surface. When his fighter jet approached, the object shot away, faster than anything he had ever seen. Radar tracked it descending toward the water and disappearing. The USS Nimitz carrier group tracked multiple objects during that incident. The radar operators called them tic-tacs because of their shape. They appeared at 80,000 feet altitude, dropped to sea level in seconds, hovered, then vanished. No heat signature, no exhaust. No sonic boom despite traveling faster than sound. The Nimitz incident is not isolated. Navy personnel have reported similar encounters for decades, especially in deep ocean areas like the Bermuda Triangle, areas like the waters around Puerto Rico, areas like the coast of Southern California, where the ocean drops quickly to extreme depths. What if these objects are not coming from space? What if they are coming from the ocean? What if the deep trenches contain bases or habitats for something non-human that has been here far longer than we have? The ancient Sumerians believed that their god Enki lived in the Abzu, the deep freshwater ocean beneath the earth. He was the god of wisdom, crafts, and magic. He taught humanity the arts of civilization, and his domain was always described as underwater, unreachable by ordinary humans. Hindu texts describe the Nagas, serpent beings who live in Patala, the underworld beneath the cosmic ocean. They are described as wise, powerful, and sometimes hostile to humans. They possess advanced knowledge and magical abilities. Japanese folklore includes the kappa, amphibious beings that live in rivers and oceans. Chinese mythology has the dragon kings, who rule underwater palaces. Celtic legends speak of the Fomorians, a race of sea giants who battled humans for control of Ireland. Almost every ancient culture has stories of intelligent beings living underwater. We dismiss these as mythology, as primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. But what if they are cultural memories? What if ancient people encountered something in the ocean and created stories to explain what they saw? The Dogon tribe in Mali has astronomical knowledge they should not possess. They knew about Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, decades before modern telescopes confirmed its existence. They say their ancestors were taught by beings called the Nomo, amphibious creatures who came from the stars and lived in water. How did a pre-industrial African tribe know about a star system that requires advanced telescopes to observe? The mainstream explanation is that they were told by European anthropologists, but the Dogon insist their knowledge is ancient, passed down through oral tradition for centuries. If the Atlanteans were performing rituals to contact something in the ocean, if they believed these beings held knowledge or power, if they structured their entire civilization around maintaining that connection, then their myths about Poseidon and sea gods might be describing something real, not supernatural, not divine, but present, intelligent, dwelling in the parts of the ocean we still cannot reach. And maybe, just maybe, still there. The question nobody wants to ask is simple. If ancient civilizations were just primitive people with stone tools, how did they do any of this? How did they move blocks of stone weighing 70 tons? How did they carve granite with precision that modern diamond-tipped tools struggle to replicate? How did they align structures to celestial bodies with accuracy that requires understanding of precession, a 26,000-year cycle that was not officially discovered until the 1700s? The standard answer is manpower, patience, and ingenuity. Thousands of workers pulling sledges, copper tools and sand for abrasion, careful observation of the stars over generations. It is possible, we are told. Difficult, but possible. Except when you actually try to replicate their achievements with those methods, it does not work. Modern experiments attempting to move massive stones using Bronze Age technology consistently fail or require modifications that ancient people supposedly did not have. Copper tools dull almost immediately against granite. Sand abrasion works, but the time required to create the precision we see in ancient stonework would take centuries for a single structure. Something is missing from the equation. Either the ancient builders had technology we do not know about, or they understood principles of physics we have forgotten. The Antikythera mechanism sits in a museum in Athens. It was recovered from a shipwreck in 1901. For decades, nobody understood what it was. Corroded bronze gears fused together. When researchers finally X-rayed it and created a reconstruction, they found something impossible. It is a mechanical computer, built around 100 BC. It contains 37 bronze gears that calculate astronomical positions, predict eclipses, track the Olympic Games cycle, and display the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. The level of engineering is extraordinary. Nothing remotely comparable appears in historical records for another 1,000 years. Whoever built this understood advanced mathematics, astronomy, and mechanical engineering. They understood gear ratios. They understood differential gearing, a technique that was not reinvented until the 1600s. They built a device to model the cosmos with accuracy that would not be matched until the Renaissance. This is not primitive technology. This is sophisticated science. And it was built 2,000 years ago by people who supposedly did not have the knowledge to create such devices. Now consider the Baghdad battery, found in Iraq in 1936. A clay jar with a copper cylinder and an iron rod sealed with asphalt. When you fill it with an acidic solution like vinegar or citrus juice, it generates electricity. Not much, about 1 volt, but measurable current, dated to around 200 BC, possibly earlier. Why would ancient people need batteries? The standard archaeological response is that they did not. It must have been for something else. Storage vessel, religious artifact, coincidental construction that happens to generate current, but was not designed to. Except, similar devices have been found in Egypt. And the temple at Dendera has those controversial hieroglyphs that look remarkably like light bulbs inside glass tubes, connected to what appear to be power sources. Engineers have built working models based on those hieroglyphs. They produce light. Not bright, but functional. If you connect multiple batteries in series, the output increases. The Egyptians carved underground chambers deep inside mountains, miles of tunnels, intricate hieroglyphs on every surface. The official explanation is that they worked by torch and oil lamplight, but there is no soot on the ceilings. Torches create soot. Oil lamps create soot. Hours of work in enclosed spaces with open flames would leave thick black residue. But the ceilings are clean. Either they had ventilation systems sophisticated enough to remove all smoke, or they had a light source that did not produce combustion byproducts. Electrical light would fit. But mainstream archaeology insists they did not have electricity, so it must be something else. The lack of soot remains unexplained. Then there is the precision of their stonework. The granite coffer in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid is carved from a single block of red Aswan granite, one of the hardest stones on Earth. The interior corners are perfectly square. The walls are smooth and flat, to within a few thousandths of an inch. The exterior dimensions are symmetrical to tolerances that modern machinists consider excellent. Christopher Dunn, who worked as a craftsman and engineer for decades, examined this coffer with precision measuring equipment. His conclusion is unambiguous. It was created with machine tools, not chisels and mallets, not sand and string. The marks on the surface, the consistency of the cuts, the geometric accuracy, all indicate advanced machining. He found similar evidence throughout the Giza complex. Core drill holes in granite that show feed marks indicating a drill bit that cut through solid granite at a rate of 1/10 of an inch per revolution. Modern diamond-tipped drill bits, powered by electricity, cut granite at about 1/1000th of an inch per revolution. Whatever the ancient Egyptians were using was 10 times more efficient than our best current technology. The saw marks on granite blocks show cuts that are perfectly straight for lengths of 8 feet or more. No deviation, no wobble, no irregularity. Try cutting a straight line through 8 feet of granite with a copper saw and sand. It is functionally impossible. Dunn's theory is that the Egyptians had ultrasonic drilling technology, high-frequency vibration that breaks down stone at a molecular level. It is the only explanation that fits the physical evidence, but ultrasonic drilling requires electricity. It requires understanding of frequency and resonance. It requires technology that was not supposed to exist until the 20th century, unless it did exist, unless it was lost, unless the people who built the pyramids were not primitive workers with unlimited time and patience, but skilled engineers with tools we no longer understand. Ed Leedskalnin proved it was possible. Working alone in the early 1900s, he quarried, moved, and precisely placed limestone blocks weighing up to 30 tons each. He built walls, carved furniture, created a revolving door made from a 9-ton stone so perfectly balanced that a child could push it open. He had no heavy machinery, no construction crew, no modern equipment. When asked how he did it, he said he understood the secrets of the pyramids. He knew how the Egyptians lifted heavy stones. He talked about magnetic currents, about aligning with natural forces, about using the Earth's own energy. He built strange devices with wire coils and magnets. He worked at night when no one could watch him. After his death, researchers found his workshop full of handmade equipment, electromagnetic devices, experimental setups that suggested he was manipulating magnetic fields in ways mainstream physics does not acknowledge as possible. But the evidence is there. He accomplished what should have required industrial machinery, using principles that died with him. Nikola Tesla believed this was possible. He said that if you understand frequency, vibration, and resonance, you understand the secrets of the universe. He demonstrated wireless power transmission. He created earthquakes with a small oscillating device. He claimed that with the right frequency, you could split the earth in half. The establishment called him crazy, but his inventions work. We use his alternating current system to power the entire modern world. His ideas about wireless energy transmission, dismissed for a century, are now being revisited by companies developing wireless charging and power beaming technology. What if Tesla was right about resonance? What if ancient builders understood this principle? What if they did not need to drag massive stones using brute force because they knew how to reduce the effect of gravity through vibration? Acoustic levitation is real. Scientists have demonstrated that objects can be suspended in mid-air using nothing but sound waves at specific frequencies. It works in laboratories with small objects, but the principle scales. If you can generate sufficient acoustic power at the right frequency, you can levitate larger masses. The pyramid at Giza has acoustic properties. The chambers resonate at specific frequencies. The shafts act as waveguides. The entire structure could function as a resonance chamber if supplied with the right input. Christopher Dunn calculated that if the chambers were filled with hydrogen gas and energized with microwave energy, the pyramid could generate significant electrical power through the piezoelectric properties of the granite. Sound insane? The design matches, the materials match, the dimensions match, the wavelengths required. The only thing missing is the power source and the understanding that this was the purpose. But if the Atlanteans had this knowledge, if they built their temple complex as an acoustic amplifier and electromagnetic generator, if they used rituals involving conductive solutions and resonant frequencies to power their technology, then the pyramid builders might have inherited that knowledge. The timeline fits. The Egyptians claim their civilization was founded by the gods who came before. They call them the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, who ruled Egypt before the pharaohs. The Sphinx, according to geologist Robert Schoch, shows water erosion patterns consistent with heavy rainfall. But the Sahara has been dry for thousands of years. The last time that region had sufficient rain to cause that erosion was before 7000 BC, possibly as far back as 10,000 BC. The Sphinx is older than Egyptology admits. The pyramids might be older too, or they were built by people who still remembered how the ancients did it. And then that knowledge was lost. Not slowly, not gradually, but suddenly, as if the civilization that held it was destroyed, as if the survivors scattered and could only pass down fragments, pieces, degraded copies of what their ancestors knew. The Romans built aqueducts and concrete that still stands 2,000 years later. Then the empire fell, and Europe forgot how to make concrete for 1,000 years. The formula was lost. It was not reinvented until the 1700s. If Rome could lose concrete in 1,000 years, what could humanity lose in 10,000? So why is nobody talking about this? Why are these discoveries ignored, dismissed, or actively suppressed? Why does mainstream archaeology fight so hard against any evidence that contradicts the established timeline? The answer is simpler than you think. Money, reputation, control. Academic archaeology is not about discovering truth. It is about protecting careers, securing funding, and maintaining the narrative that keeps institutions relevant. If you are a tenured professor who has spent 40 years teaching that civilization began in Mesopotamia around 4000 BC, and someone presents evidence of advanced cities existing 6,000 years earlier, you have two choices. Admit you were wrong and watch your life's work collapse, or attack the evidence and protect your position. Most choose the second option. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented pattern. When Graham Hancock published Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995, presenting evidence for advanced pre-Ice Age civilizations, the archaeological establishment did not engage with his evidence. They attacked his credentials. He is not a trained archaeologist, they said. He is a journalist, a pseudoscientist. His ideas are dangerous. Dangerous to whom? To the people whose entire careers depend on the current timeline being correct. When Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, published his findings about water erosion on the Sphinx indicating a date before 7000 BC, Egyptologists did not dispute his geological analysis. They simply said he must be wrong because it contradicts everything we know. The erosion must be from something else. Underground water, chemical weathering, anything but rain. Because accepting rain means accepting that the Sphinx is older than Egyptian civilization, and that breaks the model. Schoch is a credentialed geologist. His analysis is based on standard geological principles, but because his conclusion threatens the established narrative, it is dismissed. The pattern repeats everywhere. When researchers announced the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a massive temple complex dated to 9600 BC, thousands of years before agriculture, before pottery, before any civilization was supposed to exist, the find was so undeniable that it had to be accepted. But rather than asking what this means for our understanding of human development, the response was to create a special exception. Göbekli Tepe is an anomaly, they said, an isolated case. It does not change the overall timeline, except it does. It proves that people 11,000 years ago were capable of organizing large-scale construction projects requiring planning, engineering, and social coordination. If they could do that in Turkey, they could do it anywhere. The only reason we have not found more sites from that period is because we are not looking, or because they are underwater, buried under 400 feet of ocean that rose when the Ice Age ended. Which brings us back to those structures off the coast of Cuba. In 2001, Paulina Zalitsky's team used advanced sonar to map formations at 2,000 feet depth, pyramids, plazas, organized structures covering 2 square kilometers. National Geographic was interested. The Cuban government sent officials. This was going to be major news. Then the funding disappeared. Access was restricted. Zalitsky's team was disbanded. No follow-up research was published. The story vanished from media. When journalists ask about it now, they get vague responses about needing more study or claims that the formations are natural, despite the sonar images clearly showing geometric precision. Why shut it down? If the structures are natural, proving that would discredit the Atlantis seekers and reinforce the mainstream narrative. It would be a win for establishment archaeology. So why not allow the research? Unless the structures are not natural, unless further investigation would prove they are artificial, unless the implications of artificial structures at that depth and that age would demolish the accepted timeline of civilization. The Smithsonian Institution has been accused for decades of making inconvenient discoveries disappear. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, newspapers across America reported the discovery of giant human skeletons, some 7 to 9 feet tall, in burial mounds throughout the Midwest. The Smithsonian collected many of these specimens. Today, they claim none exist, lost, misplaced, or never properly documented. Convenient. Because giant skeletons do not fit the narrative. They suggest populations that do not match our understanding of human migration and development. So rather than explain them, they vanish. Documents from Smithsonian correspondence, now public, show institution officials discussing what to do with anomalous artifacts that do not fit the established chronology. The consistent recommendation is to set them aside for future study. They go into storage. They are never seen again. This is not ancient history. In 2014, the Supreme Court ordered the Smithsonian to release classified documents related to their discovery and destruction of giant skeleton remains in the early 1900s. The documents confirmed that the institution had been involved in covering up evidence to protect mainstream theories. Edgar Cayce, the American psychic who died in 1945, made specific predictions about Atlantis. He said the Hall of Records, containing the history and technology of Atlantis, was buried beneath the Sphinx in Egypt. He said it would be discovered before the end of the 20th century. He said ruins of Atlantis would emerge near Bimini in 1968 or 69. In 1968, the Bimini Road was discovered. Massive limestone blocks arranged in a linear pattern underwater off the Bahamas. Coincidence? Maybe. But it got attention. The CIA took an interest in Cayce's predictions. Declassified documents show the agency investigated remote viewing, psychic phenomena, and archaeological sites that Cayce identified. Why would the intelligence community care about ancient ruins? Unless those ruins contain technology or knowledge that has strategic value, oil companies have detailed maps of the ocean floor. They use sonar and seismic surveys to locate drilling sites. They have found structures that are never reported publicly because their business is oil, not archaeology, and reporting anomalies invites scrutiny and regulation. But those maps exist. Researchers have tried to access them through Freedom of Information Act requests. The maps are classified for national security reasons. National security. The shape of the ocean floor is a threat to national security. Why? What is down there that governments do not want us to see? Insurance companies have their own concerns. Coastal cities worldwide represent trillions of dollars in property value. If evidence emerges that sea levels have risen catastrophically in the past, if proof surfaces that advanced coastal civilizations were wiped out by flooding, it changes risk models. It affects policy. It creates panic. Better to keep it quiet. Better to dismiss the evidence. Better to fund the archaeologists who support the safe narrative and deny grants to anyone asking dangerous questions. In 2007, a geologist working for an oil company in the Gulf of Mexico found what appeared to be pyramid structures on sonar scans at extreme depth. He reported it to his supervisors. He was told to delete the data and never speak of it. He complied. He had a family. He needed his job. But years later, after retiring, he leaked the information to independent researchers. The coordinates he provided show the structures are in international waters, outside US jurisdiction. But the area is monitored by naval vessels. Civilian access is restricted. Why restrict access to empty ocean? Why monitor an area with no strategic resources? Unless there is something there that someone wants to keep hidden. The pattern is consistent. Evidence emerges. Interest builds. Official channels get involved. Funding disappears. Access is restricted. Researchers are discredited or silenced. The story fades. The public forgets. The narrative remains intact. This is how you cover up history. Not with dramatic conspiracies and men in black. You do it through bureaucracy, through gatekeeping, through control of funding and credentials. You do it by making sure the people who ask questions cannot get the resources to find answers. You do it by ensuring that anyone who challenges the accepted story is labeled a fringe theorist, a pseudoscientist, someone not to be taken seriously. And it works. Most people never hear about these discoveries. Most archaeologists never question the timeline they were taught. The system perpetuates itself because challenging it means professional suicide. But the evidence keeps accumulating. The underwater structures keep being found. The anomalies keep appearing. And more people are starting to ask why we are not allowed to investigate. What are they hiding? And more importantly, why? Plato did not just describe Atlantis as a powerful civilization. He described its fall, and the way he tells it, the destruction was not random. It was consequence. According to his account, Atlantis started as a utopia. The people were virtuous. They valued wisdom over wealth. They lived in harmony with divine principles. But over generations, as they intermarried with mortals, and the divine essence diluted, they changed. They became ambitious, greedy, obsessed with conquest and power. Zeus, king of the gods, called a council to decide their fate. And here is where Plato's text ends abruptly. The Critias dialogue stops mid-sentence. We never get the conclusion. We never hear what Zeus decided, or what punishment he decreed. But we know what happened. Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and night. Earthquakes, floods, the entire island sinking beneath the waves, every person dead, every structure erased. Only the memory surviving in Egyptian records, and eventually in Plato's writing. The mainstream interpretation is that this is a moral tale. Pride comes before the fall. Civilizations that abandon virtue invite destruction. It is a warning against hubris, a philosophical lesson about human nature. But what if it is not metaphor? What if Plato was describing an actual event? What if Atlantis was destroyed because they did something catastrophically wrong? Let us look at what we know about cataclysms at the end of the Ice Age. Around 12,800 years ago, something dramatic happened to Earth's climate. The planet was warming gradually as the Ice Age ended, but then temperatures suddenly plunged back into near-glacial conditions. This period, called the Younger Dryas, lasted for about 1,200 years before temperatures abruptly warmed again around 11,600 years ago. What caused the Younger Dryas? For decades, scientists assumed it was a disruption in ocean currents caused by glacial meltwater. But evidence kept emerging that did not fit that model. Widespread fires, mass extinction of megafauna, a thin layer of black sediment found across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia, containing microscopic diamonds, iridium, and spherules that only form under extreme heat and pressure. The Comet Research Group, led by geologist Alan West, has spent years analyzing this evidence. Their conclusion is that Earth was hit by fragments of a disintegrating comet around 12,800 years ago. Multiple impacts, airbursts over populated areas, fires consuming millions of square miles, the shock triggering earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, ice sheets destabilizing and melting catastrophically fast. This is not fringe science anymore. Over 60 credentialed scientists from multiple institutions have contributed to this research. The evidence includes nanodiamonds found in the sediment layer, platinum anomalies, melt glass, and shocked quartz, all indicators of cosmic impact. The timing matches. 12,800 years ago is right in the window that Plato gives for Atlantis. 9,000 years before Solon, around 9600 BC, which is 11,600 years ago. That is when the Younger Dryas ended abruptly, and temperatures spiked. If Atlantis existed during this period, if they were a coastal civilization, they would have been devastated, first by the impacts and the fires, then by the rapid climate shifts, then by the catastrophic sea level rise when the ice sheets melted. But here is the disturbing question. What if it was not just bad luck? What if they caused it, not the comet? That was cosmic chance. But what if the Atlanteans were doing something with their technology, their rituals, their electromagnetic experiments that made things worse? What if they were manipulating forces they did not fully understand? Nikola Tesla demonstrated that resonance can trigger earthquakes. He built a small mechanical oscillator, attached it to a steel beam in his laboratory, and turned it on. The building started to shake. He said if he had left it running, the building would have collapsed. He claimed that with a large enough device tuned to the right frequency, you could split the Earth in half. He was not exaggerating by much. Resonance is real. When frequency matches the natural vibration of a structure or material, the effect amplifies. Soldiers marching in step across a bridge can cause it to collapse if their footfall frequency matches the bridge's natural frequency. Opera singers can shatter glass by hitting the right note. Scale this principle up to geological structures, and you get earthquakes. The Earth has natural resonance frequencies. The Schumann resonances, named after physicist Winfried Otto Schumann, are electromagnetic waves that exist in the cavity between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. The primary frequency is 7.83 Hz. Human brain waves, particularly during meditation, operate at similar frequencies. Some researchers believe this is why spending time in nature feels calming. We are literally resonating with the planet. But resonance works both ways. If you generate powerful electromagnetic fields at specific frequencies, you can affect geological stability. You can trigger fault lines. You can destabilize underground magma chambers. You can cause earthquakes. What if the Atlanteans, in their pursuit of power and communication with whatever they believed existed in the ocean depths, ramped up their rituals? What if they increased the frequency, the intensity, the duration? What if they were so convinced of their righteousness, so certain of their control, that they pushed beyond safe limits? And what if, at the exact moment their rituals reached peak intensity, fragments of a comet slammed into the Earth? What if the combination of cosmic impact and human-generated resonance created a feedback loop that amplified the destruction? The evidence suggests that the areas hit hardest by the younger Dryas impacts were the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean, exactly where Plato places Atlantis, exactly where you would expect a coastal civilization to be wiped out. Ancient texts from multiple cultures describe this period as a time when the gods fought each other. The Hindu Mahabharata describes weapons that sound like nuclear explosions, bright lights, entire armies vaporized, cities reduced to ash. The Popol Vuh, the Mayan creation text, describes the destruction of previous worlds by fire and flood. The Norse Ragnarok prophecy describes the death of gods and the sinking of the world into the sea before a new world emerges. These are not random myths. They are describing the same event from different cultural perspectives. A global catastrophe, fire from the sky, the earth shaking, the seas rising, civilizations destroyed, and the survivors remember it as divine punishment. The gods were angry. Humanity had gone too far. We were reset, forced to start over. What if that is exactly what happened? What if Atlantis represents the peak of pre-flood civilization? The culture that had advanced the furthest, that understood the most about manipulating natural forces, that had the hubris to believe they could control powers beyond their comprehension. And what if their destruction was the warning, the message carved into human memory through trauma and passed down through every culture's mythology? There are limits. There are forces you do not touch. There are rituals you do not perform. Cross that line, and you invite annihilation. We have forgotten the lesson. We have dismissed the warnings as primitive superstition. We have convinced ourselves that ancient people were ignorant and that we are enlightened. We push boundaries without asking whether we should. We split the atom. We manipulate genes. We probe the deepest ocean trenches with instruments that emit powerful sonar pulses. We conduct electromagnetic experiments without fully understanding the consequences. We are doing exactly what the Atlanteans did, pushing forward with technology and confidence, assuming we are in control, ignoring the possibility that some doors should stay closed. And if history repeats, if the pattern holds, we will learn the same lesson they did, but by then it will be too late. We are not just studying ancient mysteries for curiosity. We are looking at them because we are repeating the same patterns right now. The technologies we are developing, the experiments we are conducting, the forces we are manipulating, all of it echoes what the Atlanteans were doing, and we are ignoring the same warnings. CERN operates the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland. It is the most powerful particle accelerator ever built. Scientists smash protons together at nearly the speed of light to study the fundamental building blocks of reality. They discovered the Higgs boson. They are probing the nature of dark matter. They are trying to understand the origins of the universe. Noble goals, groundbreaking science. But they are also punching holes in the fabric of space-time at energies that have not existed since the Big Bang. They are creating conditions that have never occurred naturally on Earth, and nobody can say with absolute certainty what will happen. Before they turned on the collider, some physicists warned that it could create microscopic black holes. CERN said that even if it did, they would evaporate instantly through Hawking radiation. Probably, theoretically, based on mathematics that has never been tested because we have never created a black hole before. They turned it on anyway. Nothing catastrophic happened. But that does not mean it was safe. It means we got lucky. This time, the experiments continue. The energies increase. The collisions probe deeper into quantum reality. And we have no idea what we might inadvertently trigger. We are operating on theory and assumption, gambling that our models are correct, that we understand forces we have never directly observed. The Atlanteans believed they understood the forces they were manipulating, right up until they did not. Then there is deep-sea mining. Companies are preparing to scrape the ocean floor for minerals, rare earth elements, cobalt, nickel, resources needed for batteries and electronics. The technology exists. The economic incentive is massive. Mining operations are planned for areas 4 miles deep, where we have never disturbed the environment. Marine biologists are screaming warnings. The deep ocean ecosystem is fragile. Species down there reproduce slowly, live for centuries, exist in balance with hydrothermal vents and chemical seeps. Disrupting that environment could cause extinctions we will never even know about, because we have not identified most of the species that live there. But more than that, we do not understand the deep ocean's role in global systems, ocean currents, climate regulation, chemical cycles. The deep sea is not isolated. It connects to everything. Disturb it at scale, and you could trigger cascading effects that reach the surface. And there is another concern that nobody in the mining industry wants to discuss. What if there is something down there that should not be disturbed? Not creatures, not ecosystems, but structures, technology, remnants of what came before. Military sonar is killing whales. This is not conspiracy. This is documented fact. Naval exercises using high-powered active sonar have been directly linked to mass strandings of whales and dolphins. The sound waves are so intense they cause hemorrhaging in the animals' brains. They disrupt their navigation. They drive them to beach themselves in panic. The Navy knows this. Environmental groups have sued. Courts have ordered restrictions. But the exercises continue because national security is the ultimate trump card. We need to detect submarines. We need to map the ocean floor. We need to test our weapons systems. But what else are we affecting with those sonar pulses? What else is down there that might be sensitive to acoustic disturbance? If ancient civilizations built structures designed to resonate at specific frequencies, what happens when modern military sonar hits them? In November 2004, during the Nimitz encounter when Navy pilots tracked unidentified objects entering and exiting the ocean, the carrier group had been conducting exercises using powerful active sonar. Coincidence? Or did they ping something that responded? The Bermuda Triangle electromagnetic anomalies have been measured and documented. Compasses malfunction. Electronics fail. The Earth's magnetic field in that region is measurably unstable. Standard geology explains this as a function of the seafloor spreading at the mid-Atlantic ridge and the deep Puerto Rico Trench creating unusual conditions. But what if there is more to it? What if there are still active technologies down there, ancient installations that continue to function, generating fields that interfere with modern instruments? What if our increasing presence in the ocean, our sonar, our submarines, our drilling, is activating systems that have been dormant for thousands of years? HAARP, the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program in Alaska, is officially a research station studying the ionosphere. It transmits powerful radio waves into the upper atmosphere to observe how charged particles behave. Mainstream science. Government-funded research. But the conspiracy theories surrounding HAARP are persistent. Weather modification, earthquake triggering, mind control. Most of these claims are absurd exaggerations. But the core concern is valid. We are pumping gigawatts of electromagnetic energy into the ionosphere without fully understanding the consequences. Tesla believed the ionosphere could be used to transmit power wirelessly around the globe. He also believed it could be weaponized. HAARP operates on principles Tesla theorized about a century ago. The technology exists to manipulate atmospheric electricity. Whether it should be used is a different question. Ancient myths describe gods throwing lightning bolts. What if those were not myths? What if previous civilizations had mastered atmospheric electricity and the survivors remembered it as divine power? Google Earth has revealed dozens of underwater structures that were invisible before satellite mapping, off the coast of Japan, near Cuba, in the Mediterranean, along the coast of India, geometric formations at depths that should not contain human construction. Amateur researchers find these structures and post coordinates online. Then the images get blurred in updates. The formations disappear from public view. Not deleted, just obscured. Google says it is to protect sensitive areas or comply with government requests. Sensitive how? What is sensitive about empty ocean floor? Unless it is not empty. We are in a paradox. Our technology is advanced enough to detect anomalies, but not advanced enough, or not permitted, to investigate them properly. We see hints of something vast and hidden beneath the ocean, but we are not allowed to look closer. And the tools we are using to explore, the sonar, the drilling, the electromagnetic experiments, might be waking up things that have been silent for millennia. The Atlanteans conducted rituals to contact something in the deep ocean. They built technology to amplify their signal. They believed they were in control. We are conducting experiments with forces we barely understand. We are probing the deep ocean with instruments that emit powerful energy. We believe we are in control. The pattern is identical. The hubris is the same. The confidence that we know what we are doing, that we can handle whatever we find, that the risks are manageable. History suggests otherwise. History suggests that when civilizations reach this point, when they start manipulating fundamental forces without wisdom to match their power, something goes catastrophically wrong. And if the myths are right, if the warnings carved into every ancient culture are accurate, it does not end well. We are not learning from Atlantis. We are becoming Atlantis. Let us put all the pieces together and ask the question that nobody wants to confront directly. What if the Atlantean rituals were not about worshipping gods or contacting spirits? What if they were attempting something far more literal? What if they were trying to communicate with an intelligent, non-human presence that they knew existed in the deep ocean? And what if they succeeded? This sounds like science fiction until you realize that every ancient culture describes the same thing. Beings of immense knowledge who came from the water or the sky and taught humanity the foundations of civilization. They are not described as gods in the abstract sense. They are described as physical entities who interacted with humans, who had technology, who lived in specific locations, and who eventually departed or went into hiding. The Sumerians, the oldest known written civilization, described the Anunnaki, beings who came from the sky and established kingship on Earth. But they also describe Enki, who lived in the Abzu, the deep ocean beneath the world. Enki is credited with teaching humanity agriculture, mathematics, writing, and the arts of civilization. He is described as part fish, part human, dwelling in an underwater palace. The Babylonian priest Berossus, writing in the 3rd century BC, describes a being called Oannes who emerged from the ocean during the day to teach humanity and returned to the water at night. Oannes had the body of a fish but the head and limbs of a man. He taught language, science, agriculture, and law. Berossus claims there were multiple such beings over the course of history, all emerging from the sea to educate humanity. The Dogon tribe in Mali has detailed knowledge of the Sirius star system that they should not possess. They describe the Nomo, amphibious beings who came from Sirius and taught their ancestors. The Dogon knew about Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible without telescopes, centuries before Western astronomy confirmed its existence. How? They say the Nomo told them. Hindu texts describe the Matsya avatar of Vishnu, a fish being who saved humanity from the flood. The Nagas, serpent people who live in Patala beneath the ocean, are described as possessing great wisdom and advanced knowledge. They are not purely mythological. They are described with specific details about their appearance, their cities, their interactions with humans. Japanese legends speak of the Kappa, intelligent amphibious beings. Chinese mythology has the dragon kings ruling underwater kingdoms. Celtic stories describe the Fomorians, a race of beings associated with the sea who possessed knowledge of magic and craft. Polynesian cultures speak of beings who came from beneath the waves and taught navigation and astronomy. The consistency is extraordinary. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia, with no contact with each other, all describe intelligent non-human beings associated with water who possessed advanced knowledge. Either this is the most unlikely coincidence in human history, or it is cultural memory of actual contact. Now overlay this with modern UFO and UAP reports. For decades, military personnel and commercial pilots have reported objects that enter and exit water without losing speed or creating splash patterns you would expect from a solid object hitting a liquid surface at high velocity. They transition from air to water seamlessly, as if the medium makes no difference. The Navy confirmed this. Multiple pilots tracked objects on radar and visual during the Nimitz encounter in 2004. The objects descended from high altitude directly toward the ocean surface. They hovered over disturbed water. They moved in ways that physics says should be impossible. Commander David Fravor described one object as resembling a 40-foot tic-tac. No wings, no visible propulsion. It mirrored his fighter jet's movements as if anticipating his actions. Then, it accelerated and vanished. Radar tracked it moving over 60 miles in less than a minute. The official explanation is that these are advanced foreign technology, Chinese or Russian drones with capabilities far beyond what the US military possesses. But that explanation does not fit. If a foreign power had this technology, they would dominate global military power. They would not be testing it openly off the coast of California, where US Luft carrier groups can observe it. The other explanation, the one that nobody in official positions wants to say out loud, is that these objects are not foreign military. They are not human at all, and they are not coming from space. They are coming from the ocean. This matches the ancient accounts perfectly. Beings who live in the deep ocean, beings with technology we do not understand, beings who occasionally interact with humans, but mostly remain hidden, beings who were here before we built our first cities and will be here after our civilizations fall. If this is true, if there is an intelligent presence in the deep ocean, then everything about the Atlantean story makes sense. They were not performing religious rituals to imaginary gods. They were following protocols for communication with an actual entity. They built their city as a transmission device. They created electromagnetic fields using blood and seawater and resonant architecture. They sent signals into the depths. And something answered. What did they ask for? Knowledge? Power? Technology? The same things every civilization wants. And what did they receive? Enough to build a society more advanced than anything else in their time. Enough to dominate their region. Enough to become legends. But there is always a price. Every myth about humans dealing with non-human intelligence includes this theme. The fairy folk grant wishes, but demand payment. The demons give power, but claim souls. The dragons hoard knowledge, but extract tribute. The pattern is universal because the truth is universal. You do not get something for nothing, and you do not contact something vastly more powerful than yourself without consequences. The Atlanteans grew arrogant. Plato says their divine nature faded, and human weakness grew dominant. They became obsessed with conquest and material wealth. They abandoned the principles that had guided them. And when Zeus called the council of gods to decide their fate, the dialogue ends. We never hear the verdict because the verdict was execution. But maybe it was not Zeus. Maybe it was the beings in the ocean who decided the Atlanteans had become too dangerous, too unpredictable, too likely to misuse what they had been given. Maybe the destruction was not punishment, but containment, a reset, an erasure of knowledge that humanity was not ready to handle. The timing of the Younger Dryas impact event might not be coincidence. If you had technology advanced enough to navigate Earth's oceans, to enter and exit atmosphere without friction, to manipulate electromagnetic fields, could you also redirect a comet? Could you ensure that fragments hit specific targets? Could you orchestrate a controlled extinction event? Impossible to prove. But the question is worth asking. Because if the Atlanteans were destroyed by the same entities they were trying to contact, if their fall was deliberate rather than accidental, then it explains why survivors scattered and hid their knowledge. It explains why later civilizations like Egypt and Sumer had fragments of advanced knowledge, but not the complete picture. It explains why there are global taboos against certain types of magic, certain rituals, certain attempts to contact non-human intelligence. It was not superstition. It was memory. It was warning. Do not do what the Atlanteans did. Do not try to contact what lives in the deep. Do not build devices to amplify signals into the ocean. Do not perform rituals designed to open channels to non-human intelligence. Because if you succeed, you invite something into your world that you cannot control. And we are ignoring that warning completely. We are using powerful sonar that penetrates miles into the ocean depths. We are probing trenches with instruments that broadcast electromagnetic pulses. We are preparing to mine the seafloor, to drill into underwater mountains, to disturb environments that have been untouched for thousands of years. What if we are not discovering underwater ruins? What if we are waking them up? What if the increase in UAP sightings near water is not random? What if our activity in the oceans over the last century, our submarines, our sonar, our nuclear tests in the Pacific, our deep-sea exploration, has gotten attention? What if something down there is watching us now, assessing us, deciding whether we are repeating the same mistakes? The Atlantean rituals were attempts to establish contact and maintain communication. They believed they needed this connection to sustain their civilization. They built everything around it, and when it ended, their civilization ended too. We do not call them rituals anymore. We call them experiments. We call them research. We call them progress. But the mechanism is the same. We are reaching into realms we do not understand, manipulating forces beyond our control, assuming that our intelligence and technology make us safe. The Atlanteans thought the same thing. Every advanced civilization in history probably thought the same thing. Right up until the moment, they were proven catastrophically wrong. So the final question is not whether Atlantis existed or whether they tried to contact something in the ocean. The evidence suggests both are true. The question is whether they succeeded, whether something is still down there, whether it is listening, whether it is waiting, and whether we are about to find out. So here we are. 2 hours into the deepest rabbit hole you can explore without a submarine. And the honest answer is that we do not know. We cannot know. Not with certainty. Not yet. But we can look at what we do know. Plato wrote a detailed account of a civilization that mainstream archaeology insists never existed. Except we keep finding underwater structures that match his descriptions. We keep finding evidence of catastrophic flooding at exactly the timeline he specified. We keep finding advanced knowledge in ancient cultures that should not have existed according to the official narrative. We know that 200 cultures around the world have flood myths describing the same event. We know that sea levels rose 400 feet at the end of the Ice Age, drowning coastlines where people had lived for thousands of years. We know that the survivors of that catastrophe passed down stories that became the foundation myths of every civilization that came after. We know that ancient builders had capabilities we cannot explain with primitive tools. We know they understood acoustics, astronomy, and engineering at levels that challenge our assumptions about human development. We know they were obsessed with rituals involving water, blood, and specific frequencies. And we know they built structures that still exhibit unusual electromagnetic and acoustic properties. We know the deep ocean remains almost entirely unexplored. We know it contains sounds we cannot explain. We know military personnel have tracked objects entering and exiting the water with technology that should not exist. We know governments classify information about underwater discoveries and restrict access to sites that should be open for research. And we know that we are conducting experiments right now, with particle accelerators and deep-sea mining and military sonar, that manipulate forces we barely understand. We are pushing boundaries without asking whether those boundaries exist for a reason. The technology to explore the ocean depths exists. Submersibles can reach the deepest trenches. Sonar can map the seafloor in detail. Satellite imaging can detect anomalies. The tools are there. What is missing is permission, funding, and institutional will. But that is changing. Private companies are developing deep-sea exploration capabilities. Civilian researchers are using publicly available satellite data to find structures that were hidden for decades. The internet allows information to spread faster than institutions can suppress it. The gatekeepers are losing control of the narrative. In the next 10 years, we are going to find things. Structures that should not exist. Artifacts that do not fit the timeline. Evidence that forces mainstream archaeology to either adapt or become irrelevant. The question is whether we will be ready for what those discoveries mean. Because if Atlantis was real, if they were as advanced as the evidence suggests, if they were destroyed as catastrophically as the myths describe, then we need to understand why. We need to know what they did wrong. We need to learn the lesson they paid for with their existence. Were they trying to contact something below the ocean? The rituals suggest yes. The architecture supports it. The mythology confirms it. Did they succeed? We cannot prove it. But the patterns are there. The warnings are there. The taboos that survived in every culture are there. And if something is down there, if intelligence exists in the deep ocean that has been here longer than human civilization, if the Atlanteans made contact and paid the price, then we need to decide what we do with that possibility. Do we keep probing? Keep pushing? Keep assuming that our technology and our confidence make us immune to the consequences that destroyed everyone who came before us? Or do we approach the ocean with the respect and caution that ancient cultures insisted on? I do not have the answer. Nobody does. But I know this. The ocean covers 70% of our planet. We have explored less than 5% of it. The remaining 95% is dark, deep, and full of things we have never seen. Atlantis is down there somewhere. Maybe in pieces, maybe buried under sediment, maybe still intact in trenches we have not reached. And if we find it, if we excavate those temples and translate those inscriptions, and discover what rituals they were performing, we will face a choice. Do we repeat them? Do we try to finish what they started? Do we attempt contact with whatever they believed was listening? Or do we finally learn from history and leave some doors closed? What would you do if you found it? Really think about that, because somebody is going to find it, maybe soon. And what happens next depends on whether we are wiser than the Atlanteans were, or whether we are just the next civilization that thought we knew better. Thanks for watching. This is Mr. H. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and whatever you do, stay away from deep water at night.